Identification of performance standards. Performance standards identify what each student should learn and how well they should learn it. They're established for each content area and provide the basis for alignment of curriculum and assessment. Performance standards should be appropriate and should be set high enough to challenge students. The list below is a classification of educational objectives that is used to determine levels of student performance as it relates to these standards. The objectives are in order from 1 to 5, with 1 being the most basic understanding and 5 being the most profound understanding of the information. 1. Retrieval. Students can identify or recognize features of information, but not necessarily understand the structure of the knowledge or be able to differentiate critical from non-critical components. The students may be able to perform a procedure without significant error, but not necessarily understand how and why the procedure works. The result is only a topical understanding of the subject matter. This number 1 retrieval, I find, affects. If you have a course that doesn't have enough content, all it has is question bank and quizzes, I find that students become frustrated. They say, all I'm doing is memorizing questions and regurgitating on a test. Like, they won't know acronyms are a good example. A bunch of letters that signify other things, an acronym. And it's frustrating to students when all they get is retrieval, but there's no way to dive deeper. So let's go a little bit deeper. 2, comprehension. Students can identify the fundamental components of the subject matter and recognize critical and non-critical components of the subject matter. The student is starting to understand the subject matter as a whole, forming an overall concept of the information. 3, analysis. Students are able to make associations that solidify the information for them personally. They're able to give order to the components of the information, from most critical to least critical. They're able to identify errors made by other students working with the subject matter. The students are also able to construct new principles or generalizations based on the knowledge and identify specific applications or logical sequences of the knowledge. This is where students start to enjoy their learning. Once they can analyze it and take more from it. You notice this a lot in Rules of the Road and Chart Nav. These are the 2 subjects where students really start to gain a full understanding. You might think that Rules of the Road is just memorizing questions and regurgitating the answers on a quiz, but those questions are actually sentences from the Rules of the Road book. So by memorizing those sentences, they kind of lock in this information, and then they work with it a little bit. The instructor, or they, the student, can come up with personal situations that they've had in their life and relate those rules to those situations. So the classic one is a charter fishing boat, like a 6-pack boat with trolling lines, trolling gear, rods and reels, and a sailboat. These 2 are always competing, and there's a lot of times a misunderstanding. Which one has right of way? The sailing vessel or the guy who's on a fishing charter and he's got paying customers? The answer is the sailboat has right of way if they don't have an engine on, because it's sailboat versus power-driven vessel. But common courtesy says the recreational sailor should just stay well clear of that trolling vessel. And this is one instance. The trolling vessel's only going like a couple knots. And a lot of times, at least when I was sailing, I would try to cross in front of that trolling, that commercial, like, charter fishing vessel, because you don't want to take their lines with you. If you cross right behind somebody that's fishing, and you have a deep keel, you'll just take all their lines, and it's not good at all. So the main point here was the students on number 3, analysis. This is when the students start to enjoy the information and use it to their advantage by relating it to themselves. 4. Utilization. Students can use their knowledge to make decisions about the use of the topic. They can use the knowledge to either solve problems or to solve problems about the use of the knowledge. They can also use the knowledge to generate and test hypotheses about the topic or to generate and test hypotheses about the knowledge. The student can use the knowledge to conduct investigations or to conduct investigations about the knowledge. So they can investigate situations based on the knowledge or investigate the knowledge itself. 5. Self-thinking. Students can determine the extent to which they are clear and accurate about the knowledge and identify how important the knowledge is to him or her, as well as the reasons underlying their perception. The student can identify their level of motivation to improve competence or understanding of the topic. Qualified instructors need to be aware of the different levels of understanding which students have about the subject matter in each exam module of the OUPVM Master 100 course. Some of the subject matter requires higher levels of understanding, and the QI must facilitate the creation of student understanding and recognize the level of understanding that each student has obtained. The online classroom automates the performance standards identification process. As students progress through modules online, they take quizzes which test their level of understanding of the subject matter. The student may only move on to the next topic once he or she has completed the quiz with an adequate grade for that topic. Students must achieve a grade that is equivalent to or higher than that of the grade they must get on the final proctored exam. So in the online classroom, all of the final quizzes, for example, you have to get a higher grade on the final practice quizzes than you need on the actual final exam. So you set higher performance standards on the practice quizzes, and then the actual final exam is set a little bit lower, so you can kind of ensure better outcomes from the students because they have to work harder on practice quizzes to get a high enough mark to pass. The online classroom is a tool to help facilitate the student and QI in identifying which performance standards are met. Students may gain the knowledge and meet the performance standards put forth by the USCG to complete the OUPVM Master 100-ton course using only the online classroom and required books and tools. Once all of the required quizzes for each exam module have been passed, the student is ready to take their final proctored examination. The final exams are administered by a USCG qualified instructor or proctor at or from a USCG approved location. Because now, in the past, it was Coast Guard regulated, you must take the in-person final exams. COVID set in. It's currently September 20th, 2022. So COVID started like 2.5 years ago or something like that. And online final examination was approved by the Coast Guard after about a year of COVID. So now it's kind of at or from an approved location. So instead of just doing it in person, now we can do it online, and it actually raises performance standards to do it online. It's more accurate. It grades itself. It takes out all empathy and sympathy for the student. If you're in a classroom with a student for 10 days and become very, you become friends, you become close to that student, just as a good person, you want to see that student succeed. So you might have some sympathy for these students and help them. A qualified instructor might help them through the final. But with online finals, the program is not sympathetic, is not empathetic. It does not help in any way. They just simply check all the boxes, submit, it grades it, it spits out their grade. That's that. Although the online classroom is a USCG prove method of meeting all performance standards for the OUPVM Master 100-ton training before testing with the QI or Proctor. It cannot take the place of an experienced QI in facilitating a deep understanding of the material. The qualified instructor has the ability to relate subject matter to individual students using associations that relate to each individual student. So this kind of goes back to the sailboat versus charter fishing guy. If you have both of these guys in your classroom, you can relate examples to the charter fisherman. You can relate examples directly to the person who grew up sailing. And they will actually talk this situation out amongst each other and come up with a much deeper understanding of this situation and the technical aspects of it as described by the rules of the road. Technically, the sailing vessel has right of way, but common courtesy says the sailboat shouldn't take all the gear from the charter fisherman by passing close behind him. Things like this. Identification of performance standards.